Right then guys, welcome to the latest YouTube video. So today is basically just going to be a bit of a sit down and talk video really. And I think I'm going to do this a little bit more often, to be honest, because I quite like this kind of content where I'm just going to cover topics. Basically, I'll aim to pick a topic generally each week that I get a question on or that comes up in client check-ins or in conversation, and something that I think, maybe more people will benefit from learning more about that topic or just trying to understand that topic a little bit more. I'm not going to sort of make this a series or anything like that. Just generally, I will aim to do these at least sort of once a week, and try and generally give a bit more insight on some different topics. So the first one, or this week's episode, I guess, is going to be on whether or not you should bulk or you should maingain, and obviously a play on the word of maintain. So I believe the Maingaining term has been popularized by Coach Greg Doucette. I'm sure a lot of people know who that is or watches his YouTube videos. So I believe that he's popularized it, and I understand that it obviously means to generally maintain body weight but work to improve your body composition and build more muscle mass at maintenance calories, basically, which is completely understandable. And I agree with to an extent. I don't know exactly how he terms it or anything, by the way, but I agree with it to an extent, to quite a large extent, to be honest. But I think it depends on where you are, and again, I don't know whether he sort of states this or not, but generally I would argue that there is like a body composition sweet spot, if you like, and that is a spectrum for different individuals, where generally hormonally you're in a good position, from a body fat percentage you're in a good position. Generally you're pretty healthy, you're not too lean, but you're also not overly fat. So that sweet spot is generally, it's hard to say. I'm not going to give an exact body fat percentage, but it's going to be on a scale between sort of different ranges for different people. But for me, it's not that hard to determine it. So generally what I would say is, if you are sort of, if you're in the side of the scale where you're too lean, you'll generally know, because you will be the type of individual who probably hasn't progressed their training for the past however many months. You don't really tend to get stronger. You don't really tend to get bigger. You don't see the scales go. You don't see the scale weight go up. And generally, looking at you visually, you are, very, very low body fat percentage. You just probably look really, really skinny, for the most part, unless you're, generally someone who's got a huge amount of muscle. But if you've got a huge amount of muscle, you're going to know what you're doing already. So this is for, let's say, a beginner or maybe an intermediate trainer who's wondering why they're not growing. If you just feel skinny and really small, like generally you're going to need to eat more food and to aid growth, because you're probably not in that sweet spot just yet. Likewise, if you're on the other end of the scale, let's imagine you're the type of individual who's always sort of looking in the mirror and being like, I wish I was a bit leaner. I'm sort of feel a bit fat. I'm not sort of really seeing any physique progress. Likelihood is there's probably a little bit too much body fat, first of all, covering your muscle underneath and seeing that definition. But not only that, you're also, it's likewise being too lean, you can be too fat, which is going to be, a negative. It's going to be a negative sort of impact. It's going to have a negative impact on whether or not you can build muscle. Okay, so a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm bulking, I'll just eat as much as I want. But if that was the case, if that was the primary driver for building muscle, then we wouldn't even need to go to the gym. We'd just eat as much food as possible, and the only response we'd get to potentially sort of stimulate hypertrophy would be just from eating an adequate amount of protein. So the sweet spot would generally be, in between those two ranges, where you're not excessively adding body fat for the sake of it. You've not got any unnecessary fat, especially around sort of the midsection, the waist. You're not just sort of storing fat for the sake of it. It's not benefiting your performance. But likewise, you're not overly lean to the point where you're shaking all over the place with dumbbells because you've got no body fat around your scapula or around your elbows. Obviously, your testosterone is going to be pretty low if you're overly lean. Likewise, it's going to be low if you're overweight, and your estrogen levels are going to be higher. So it's that sweet spot in between. And like I say, I don't like to give an exact body fat percentage number, because it's going to be completely dependent on where you get that number from. If it's a DEXA scanner, if it's a bod pod, if it's underwater weigh-in, if it's just a scale that you bought on Amazon, like, it's going to be very difficult to give an accurate number. But I would generally say anywhere between 10% up to 20, maybe 25%, and again, that's completely dependent on the machine that you use to get that number. But generally between there is going to be the sweet spot for the majority of people. And then you just got to find within that sweet spot where you feel good. Yeah, where do you feel comfortable? Where do you feel happiest with your physique? Where do you feel you can progress the most in the gym? And then, necessarily you don't have to stay there. I would still recommend a very, very gradual rate of gain, because for the most part you can gain at a really, really slow rate and minimize the body fat that you're putting on while you're in a slight surplus, which is going to be putting you in a more optimal position to build muscle. We can obviously still build muscle at maintenance. We can build muscle in a deficit. It's just dependent on the scenario. But generally, what I would recommend is find that sweet spot. If you're obviously at the really low end, you need to gain pretty quickly to get up to that, because you might as well get into a better position. Yeah, so that, I'll have some clients and we'll go through a priming phase. For the most part, for 95% or so of clients, that priming phase is a fat loss phase, because more often than not, people are at that higher end of the scale and need to get into a more beneficial position. And it's always good to start at the lower end as well when you're going into a gaining phase, because you can gain for longer. Okay, so if you're starting at the lower end, if you're too lean initially, you're in a better position than if you're overweight initially, because you're going to have to diet down more so obviously when you're overweight, whereas when you're too lean, you can push up and be in a good position to push on pretty aggressively and push on for a longer period of time. And we want to be, if we're trying to build muscle, we want to be able to be in a gaining phase for the most time possible. Generally, we want to spend less time dieting, but that doesn't mean that holding phases aren't going to be beneficial. And this is where I really do agree with the main gaining. I hate saying that word. I don't. It's not a word, is it? But yeah, that's where I agree with it, because I'll go through holding phases with clients all the time. I'll go through them with myself quite a lot. If I get to a point where, let's say for example, I've pushed body weight up, or I've pushed a client's body weight up, and we start to notice some signs of creeping towards that top end of the sort of the sweet spot, we're creeping towards the top end of that spectrum, then we'll hold. We don't necessarily need to diet. Likewise, we don't need to push on rapidly and get overweight and then diet. So we might as well hold. If we hold for, let's say, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, improve composition at that weight, which you will do. If you hold at a body weight, if you don't really change anything other than improving your training during that time, if you're the same body weight over a month, but you've added 5 kilos onto your flat bench, you've added 5 kilos onto your squat, you've added 10 kilos to your deadlift, or whatever it is, whatever movements that you've got in, you're going to get better. Yeah, it's as simple as that. If you're nailing every other variable in terms of your recovery variables with your sleep, your stress, your hydration, etc., you're going to be better. So then you can push on again, and then you might need to hold again and push on again. And obviously, wherever you are within that spectrum, and whoever the individual is and where you feel most comfortable, is how hard you can push and how often you maybe need to hold. So I do agree with it in terms of that aspect, but I don't think, for example, like someone who's new to training and maybe weighing 140 pounds, who's absolutely inside out peeled because they've always struggled to eat and gain weight, and they're just really, really skinny, main gaining for those kind of individuals isn't realistic, and it's not going to get you it's not going to get you anywhere. You need to get bigger, get heavier, get some weight on you that's going to benefit your performance and put you in a better position hormonally. Likewise, if you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're massively overweight, do you really think that the best idea then is to main gain? No, you need to diet. You need to get leaner to be in a better position to then push on and grow. So that is they are my thoughts on that topic. But I'll leave it there. I'm not going to make these overly sort of scientific or list any sort of studies or anything like that. I just want to generally go off experience with clients, with myself, anecdote, and generally what I know works through my experience and time with other people. And I definitely think, that, like I say, main gaining has its place, but you have to be within that sweet spot, and you have to know when to hold body weight and not be trying to push up, because again, if you push up indefinitely, you're just going to get to that other end of the sweet spot and be overweight and have to diet. And again, like I said earlier, the less time dieting really, the better, because we can be in a more beneficial position to build muscle. Okay, I will leave it there. Any questions at all on anything there, please ask. Any future topics you want covering, please ask in the comments below. I appreciate anybody who's watching, and I will catch you all in the next video.